Germany has lots of forests, and most of them are used intensively. But there's a part of the Bavarian forest that's been left to its own devices for 28 years. That's very rare. Only 1/3% of woods in Germany are allowed to do what they want. No wood cutting, no hunting, no rangers trying to help things along. And that has produced some very interesting results.
It all began with two violent storms back in 1983, when winds uprooted 70,000 cubic metres of wood in the Bavarian Forest National Park. The toppled trees were simply left on the forest floor. The idea was to leave nature to its own devices. But it was an experiment that soon took a dangerous turn. More dead wood left by further storms and windfalls made a perfect breeding ground for this invader, the bark beetle. Its rapid proliferation destroyed another 7,000 hectares of spruce forest within 10 years.
When the bark beetle first began to spread, we thought it wouldn't last because of natural enemies and competitors and so forth. But this turned out to be too naive. The spruce bark beetle spread like wildfire and drastically altered large areas of the forest.
The public was angry over the changed appearance of the forest. It was viewed as an environmental disaster that needed to be stopped. But the experiment wasn't called off and eventually took a surprising turn. Today, what once looked like an environmental catastrophe has proved to be the very opposite. Impossible as it once seemed, new life has returned to large swathes of the forest.
Because there's no human intervention in the core area of the national park, highly dynamic processes can occur, ones that our modern society is no longer familiar with. And it's precisely these processes that boost biodiversity in the forest.
Jörg Müller has been following developments in the Bavarian Forest National Park for years. Time and again, he's observed that dead mountain spruce provide the most fertile ground for their own regeneration. New trees flourish on the decomposing wood of their predecessors. And deciduous trees such as birches and raspberry bushes emerge from the ground between the spruces. A layer of herbs and weeds cover the ground. The forest is visibly in good health. And all because the wind and the bark beetle suddenly and radically changed the balance of the forest's ecosystem. The woods are now flooded with light and warmth, and this is vital to many of the species in this cool subalpine climate. The result is a forest that provides natural habitats for a wealth of wildlife. The rare three-toed woodpecker, for example, and nearby the Ural owl is nesting in the hollow trunks. The willow tit is also settling here. Red-breasted flycatchers are now heard regularly as the wood grows thicker. But the biggest population explosion is on the forest floor. Jörg Müller has identified 450 beetle species in the dead wood. 1/3 of them are on the International Union for Conservation of Nature's Red List of Threatened Species. But here, they're benefiting from all the light now reaching the forest floor. This click beetle vanished 100 years ago, but has now reappeared. But the biologist's most surprising discovery is that the species that benefit most from the devastation of the spruce trees are those that depend on them most.
That might seem paradoxical, but ultimately it shows that what we have here is a primordial co-evolutionary process between the spruce, their inhabitants, and the regeneration of their populations. We need these fast-moving dynamics in the spruce forest to preserve its biodiversity.
The biologists have noticed other relationships playing out in the dead wood, between the beetles and various species of fungi, for example. Some beetles even cultivate fungi in the dead wood in order to live off it. Other fungi decompose the dead wood and make it more habitable. But what's the source of all this biodiversity now flourishing in the forest? The answer is astonishing. It hasn't migrated here from outside, but originates in small pockets of nature that still resemble primeval forests, right here in the middle of the national park. One of them even gave rise to the rare polypore mushroom, Antrodiella citronella. It lives off other tree fungi, but was long seen as endangered. It must have survived here in some remote corner of the forest and was discovered by the bark beetle. Now it's spreading rapidly throughout the deadwood.
It's discoveries like these that make the national park a place where we can learn a lot. It's taught us that if we preserve areas of deadwood in a managed forest, then we're allowing species to survive which can then migrate to surrounding areas.
The bark beetle is far from being a pest that the national park needs to resist. In fact, it plays a key role for the forest's renewal and for its biodiversity. In a way, it's the architect of a thriving forest. This spring was very dry, providing ideal conditions for the bark beetle. It will carry on its work, enabling new life to emerge in the process.
The lesson is, if we leave the forest alone, the ecosystem will find its own balance. It may just not be exactly the balance the timber business, the hunters, or the tourist industry would like. That's all we have.